Ever wondered why some brands seem unforgettable? It's not just about great products or marketing campaigns, it's about embedding memorability into the brand from the very beginning. Building a memorable brand isn't about luck, it's all to do with strategy. Brands like Nike, Apple, and Netflix have all become household names because they've built memorability into the DNA of that brand. Today, I'm going to walk you through the exact steps you can do the same thing with your brand and embed memorability into it from day one. Stick around to the end of this video because at the end I will talk about a powerful psychological hack that you can use to actually embed your brand in your audience's mind that not a lot of people know about. This trick can not only help your audience recognize your brand, but remember it long after the first encounter. Step 1, repetition for recognition. So one of the simplest ways you can become memorable as a brand is through repetition. So by constant exposure to your brand's images, colors, fonts, logo, and messaging, that can help your audience to take on your brand easier and remember it long term. A great example of this is McDonald's, whose tagline, "I'm loving it," you might remember, through the jingles on the TV adverts. That was a great way of associating a sort of joyful, happy-go-lucky song with the brand. And if you can connect those feelings, like emotional feelings, to your brand, it actually increases your chance of memorability. And through consistent sort of repetition and exposure to your brand, you give your audience a chance to take it on board and it becomes part of their life. Step 2, tap into emotional triggers. People might forget what you say, but they will never forget how you make them feel. And that's why emotional triggers are so powerful when it comes to branding. Because if you can make your audience feel something, you will stick in their mind. A good example of this is a brand like Nike, who every time you see its "Just Do It" slogan, it makes you feel this feeling of self-improvement, of bettering yourself, of competition, of taking that next step. And there's no excuses, just do it. Just go ahead and do it. It draws you in, it pushes you forward. And great brands do that. They tap into emotional triggers that make you get into action. Take action is the idea. There's an actual triangle, a psychological triangle that goes from thoughts, feelings, actions. And essentially a great brand will tap into that. It will help you have a thought, it will increase that feeling, and then make you take action. So great brands use emotional triggers to help make their brands more memorable. Step 3, consistent brand cues across different channels. A consistent experience across different channels strengthens recognition and memorability for your brand. So you're building in that consistency, like we talked about, repetition already, but if that's cross-channel, you allow your audience to take on your brand through different mediums, different ways of absorbing content, the message you're trying to get across, the way that you use fonts and colors, and the way that you present your brand visually. You actually increase the probability of your audience taking it on board and remembering it, and that they'll recognize it when they see you on a different platform. That's the sweet spot. Once you get to a point where your audience can recognize your brand on multiple channels, maybe even if they've never seen it on that channel before, that's when you know that your brand is etched into their mind. A great example of this is Netflix and their sound when you turn on the streaming service, so that da-dum sound at the beginning of it. That is a great example of almost priming the user for that experience. And it makes you feel something, emotional triggers, again, we talked about previously, but that repetition and that consistency on that channel. But also if you see adverts to do with Netflix, you'll hear that sound used in adverts. They're cleverly using it in multiple areas to tap into that feeling, that thought, that emotion that you have about their brand. And they've done it in such a way that it makes the experience almost more exciting. And it harks back to the old THQ sound from cinemas used to get, where before you watched a film, you'd have that sound that kind of echoed around the cinema. And it made you feel like, yes, I'm in a movie theater, I'm about to watch a film, this is the sound that's coming on. So it's a similar kind of thing that Netflix are doing there. They're priming their audience, but it's a consistency they use across all their channels that makes it so important. Step 4, leveraging unique brand elements. So for example, if you can use things like audio jingles like we talked about with the Netflix or McDonald's "I'm loving it," if you can use signature designs or templates or ways that you do certain things that are unique to you, if you can use mascots or caricatures that kind of embody the brand, personify it, that can also be individuals who are the face of the brand. So people like Elon Musk and Tesla. If you can sort of have that as a uniqueness to your brand, so these things that they embody who you are, what you stand for. So if you think of things like the Coca-Cola bottle, for example, the shape of it, the way that it looks, you can actually, they did a series of ads, Coca-Cola, where they just used the bottle as a silhouette. And you could identify that from a mile off, not just because of the bottle shape, but also the color of the red and the white they used. These kind of unique elements are things that stick in people's minds, that associate with a brand, that you can recognize from a mile off. And it's things like the reason why when I'm driving down the road with my daughter in the car, she can recognize the Starbucks mermaid and she knows it's Starbucks even though she doesn't drink coffee. So it's those things that create the recognition, the memorability, that build brands in your audience's mind. Another good example of this is the Geico Gecko, or the M&M's characters that you see in the adverts. They create a sort of personified approach to the brand. Did a recent podcast with a guy called Dr. Brandlove, called him Dr. Aaron Ahuvia, and he essentially was talking about the way that you create brand love. And one of the ways to do that is if you can get your brand to be thought of in your audience's mind as something more human than a thing. So in our mind, we have a spectrum of things, people and objects, essentially from a psychological perspective. And if you can get your brand to be thought of as a person as opposed to an object, you actually run the risk of it being more loved, more of a cult following, and more of something that people feel they belong to and can interact with. So companies like M&M's, one of the ways you can do this is through personification, which M&M's have done with their characters. They've created these characters that are 3D, they have personalities, they interact with each other in a kind of Laurel and Hardy style way. They kind of create this emotional connection with their audience through the adverts. And it's a great way to connect with your audience, build that memorability into it, the recognition, and also foster this connection, this deeper connection. So remember that psychological secret I was talking about earlier on to help you improve your brand's memorability and recognition? Well, it's all to do with how you can leverage the power of something called associative memory. This psychological concept helps people to connect new things with something they're already familiar with, something they already know. So you have something that they are not so familiar with. If you can connect that to something they already know, think, feel, love, then you can actually create this associative connection for your brand. So if you can associate your brand with an emotional cue, a feeling, a thought, a message, even visual cues that tap into their memory, so from an experience they've had previously or make them feel a certain way, you can actually increase recall quite significantly. But you also help to tap into those emotional triggers we were talking about earlier on. So a great example of this is Coca-Cola, and every year they do an advert, the holidays are coming, and it's a great way for Coca-Cola to tap into the holiday spirit. It's almost now become the thing that marks the beginning of the Christmas period. Until you hear the Coke advert, it's not really Christmas. And that actually elicits joy in the people watching it, which is a great thing because Coca-Cola is all about joy and happiness and those kind of childlike, innocent moments. So connecting that experience and the joy of the holidays to Coca-Cola is a masterstroke when it comes to brand marketing. And we see it every year, and it helps for us to recall Coca-Cola, but it also ties it to the holiday season for us. So a great way of doing that is associative memory. If you can associate your brand with something that the audience might already know, harking back to things that they've done before and experiences they've had. Key takeaways. So repetition creates recognition and familiarity. Tapping into emotional triggers leaves a lasting memory for your audience and increases their chance of recall. Consistent brand cues across all channels helps to reinforce your brand identity. And if you can leverage associative memory with your brand and tap into some previous experiences, emotions, and feelings, you actually heighten the whole process and you increase all of the things that you've done previously to another level in terms of recall, familiarity, preference. All these things get heightened even more because of associative memory and what you connect to the brand experience and how your audience interacts with it, what they feel about the brand, and what they experience when they're interacting with it. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, hit subscribe using the button below and make sure to hit the bell notification so you're notified every time a new video drops. Videos come out weekly and they're designed to help you unlock your brand's potential so you can stand out from the competition and create more impact. Have a great day, catch up soon, and keep those brands unified.